Welcome to the greatest podcast in sports betting entertainment. My name is Tanner Kern, certified G, bona fide stud, and you can't teach that. In this right here, this is G Money Grant Mitchell. It is day one, the opening day of the inaugural 12-team college football playoff, Notre Dame versus Indiana, South Bend, big time football, and I can't wait, Grant. And that's the bottom line because I said so. How you doing this morning?
You switched up the intro, Tanner.
I had to. I was too deep into it, and then I kind of forgot what the intro was because I was so pumped for college football tonight.
Yeah, happy college football playoff day to everybody that celebrates. I certainly am one of them. Tanner is one of them. I've got all of my big responsibilities out of the way already, made sure they were done. Don't tell this to the people we record this podcast for, Tanner, but I cleared my work schedule a little bit because I want to be out. I want to be out of the thought process of work. I'm going to go to the gym on my lunch break. I am going to be ready to watch football at like 4 p.m. and it doesn't start until 8. And that's just because I am locked in on what's happening this weekend.
When does college game day start, though? I think it starts at like 5 o'clock tonight.
That sounds right. Based on how long it is, like it's a playoff game, they're going to make it longer.
3:30.
Jeez.
3:30. Wow. That's
a 4.5 hour pregame.
That's a long pregame. I don't know if I'll have it on at 3:30, but I got to get my stretching in at yoga.
There's going to be a lot of Pat McAfee kicks to win some money.
That's going to be awesome, though. 3:30 and then 9 a.m. tomorrow. We got a whole slate tomorrow. Anyways, we're going to break down the top part of the bracket, the picks that we did not make on the last show. We're also going to recap the picks we made. We're going to talk big picture stuff. This is an ultimate college football playoff show, and we can't wait to bring it to you. But before we do that, Grant, tell the people why they need to go check out WSN.com.
Yeah, look, I say it at the start of every episode, but if you are into sports betting, then WSN.com is the number one place for you to be. Tanner, myself, a team of experts, people who really know their stuff, really know what they're talking about. We analyze games, we put out game previews. I was responsible for the Indiana Notre Dame one that's going on tonight, so feel free to go check that out. We've got news and insights. We've got betting trends and history. We got promo codes to get you some more opportunities at sportsbooks. Everything you could want to help your sports betting experience, you will find it at WSN.com.
And also check out the WSN NFL Sweepstakes Pick'em Contest. You have the chance to win $499 at the end of every month. You make your picks each week. If you win the week, you're entered in a pool for the end of the month to win $499. That is also linked down in the description below. But today is all about college football. Today is all about college football. Grant, since you wrote Indiana Notre Dame before we start talking about the top part of the bracket, why don't you share your pick with the people? Are you taking Notre Dame minus 7.5? Or are you taking Indiana plus 7.5?
Tanner and I talked about this in the last podcast episode. So if you want a greater breakdown on that and the whole bottom side of the bracket, go listen to it. But if you do want to read my preview, go check it out as well. I'm taking Indiana plus 7.5. And I really, really believe an outright upset is on the board. Now, naturally, it's not my best bet because it's riskier. It's less likely to hit. The odds will tell you that. But I think it's really a big possibility, especially with the conditions that we're getting. Because I don't know if you've seen, Tanner, but it's going to be low 30s, high 20s. It's snowing in South Bend as we record this right now. But there's potential it's still snowing at game time. Notre Dame, we know, only wants to run the ball, and that's great because they've got the second-ranked rushing offense in the country. But Indiana allows, I think it's like 2.5 yards per carry. Kept Ohio State under 4 yards per carry. If they shut that Notre Dame passing or running game down and they have to pass the ball, Riley Leonard can't throw the ball in broad daylight. And 80 clear skies, how's he going to do throwing it in snow? I think that has potential to go bad for Notre Dame.
I agree with that. I think I could easily see Notre Dame blowing them off the field. If Indiana can't stop the run, Notre Dame will win by a lot here. But at the same time, too, if Indiana can make Riley Leonard throw the ball, they can cover, they can win outright. So that's the key for them. But I am going to be on Indiana as well, plus 7.5 here. A little worried about it. But again, we don't know what Notre Dame has in this game. We don't know what Indiana has. Neither team has played anybody. Notre Dame, everyone thinks they can win a national championship right now. I don't know. We're going to find out. But Indiana will be ready to play. Coach Sig's got those boys fired up. I don't know if you saw him on McAfee this week, but he was just like, we'll have the boys ready to go. He was all business. He said, we don't play for participation trophies around here. And that culture, that mindset is what can lead them to a covered night. Because numbers-wise, talent-wise, Notre Dame's probably the move, but just mentality-wise, I think Indiana can play with them.
Yeah, it reminds me of Dan Lanning before that Colorado game last year. You remember his big pregame speech in the locker room, and he was saying, "Look, they're fighting for clicks, we're fighting for wins," and he was just tearing into them. And they hadn't even stepped on the field yet, and you could tell that team was ready to run through a wall for him.
And that's why I ultimately do think Oregon wins the national championship. Is Dan Lanning's a huge reason for that. If they do get there, that team seems like the most connected team in the country. So let's move into the top part of the bracket. Let's start with let's just go all the way down. We'll start Clemson, Texas here. This game should be the biggest sleeper based on the spread. I think there is a route for Clemson to be within 12 points here. I think it's less likely if Texas just plays their game, because defensively, Clemson should not be able to hold up if Texas can convert in the red zone. But Grant, how do you see this game playing out?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Tanner, but it's 11.5. Was this 11 or 10.5 early on?
It's gone up. Yeah, it was like 10. I think it was 11. It's up to 12, but it was never, it's not moving in favor of the Clemson Tigers. It's going away from them.
Yeah, I'm just looking at FanDuel's betting splits right now. And that's interesting because according to them, 53% of the money is on Clemson, 60% of bets are on Clemson. So you would expect it to go in Clemson's way, yet it's still going in Texas's way, which if you're a Texas bettor, you probably feel good about that, right? Because despite the public trend, you're getting more points in your favor. So you can probably cash out for a profit right now, and the game hasn't even started. So you're feeling good about that. I think Texas is clearly the better team. Really, there's nobody that should argue with that. The only thing I would really be worried about here, and not even worried from an upset perspective, because I think the chances of that are so unlikely, but I think it's definitely possible Clemson covers. And the reason would be Quinn Ewers he's played 6 ranked opponents. He threw at least 1 interception in 5 of them. The only time he didn't was against Michigan in the second week of the season. That's when Quinn Ewers was at his best. That's when Texas was at its best. And also Michigan finished the year 7-5. I know they beat Ohio State, but that's a rivalry game. Overall, they were not a great team this year. So Quinn Ewers is going to turn the ball over. He's also injured. That ankle is really impacting his mobility. And the fact that he can't scramble at all, really, his progressions are being sped up. He's feeling pressure earlier, and he's just had some very bad throws. Sometimes the quarterback throws an interception, and it was a close miss, or there was a miscommunication with the receiver bobbles it. It's a tip drill, whatever. Some of these interceptions Ewers has thrown lately have just been awful. That one against Georgia in the SEC championship, where I think it was a curl on the outside and he misses on the inside shoulder, and it's like the easiest pick you'll ever get. That's just terrible. So if I'm worried from a betting perspective, it would be Quinn Ewers shoots his team in the foot. But even still, I think you would look at Texas here. I think they're clearly the better team.
There are plenty of people picking Texas to win the national championship, and the reason for that is the defense is that good. The defense is as advertised. We've seen it this year. They haven't played a lot of teams, but we know the defense is good. Can the offense score enough points to win the national championship? That's what we're going to find out. We were talking before the show. I think Sark needs to start using Arch Manning. A lot of people do as well. And if he does that, this Texas team is a legitimate national title contender. I think for Quinn Ewers right now, we know Quinn Ewers is capable of leading his team to wins. He can do it. We saw it last year in the college football playoff. Obviously, they got beat in the semis. But this Texas team has played in big games, and they have an easy path. So if I'm Texas right now, I'm feeling very good about my chances of getting there. I think they're going to come out, play loose in this game. They should have no problems with Clemson. I know Dabo's a great coach. They should have no problems with Clemson. Clemson can't play defense. They weren't a great ACC team. They snuck in. They should have no problems with Arizona State, and we should see Texas in the semifinals before they are tested one bit.
Clemson this season also just was not that good. Really, they're the only 3-loss team to make it into this bracket, which is kind of crazy because we were talking about Bama. Should they be in? And if you were just to line them up on paper, say who's better, who deserves to get in, Bama or Clemson, you're putting Bama in 10 times out of 10, but Clemson gets the auto bids they have to be in, etc. If you take out that win against SMU in the ACC championship, Clemson's 3 hardest games of the year, the most difficult games were Georgia, Louisville, and South Carolina. They lost all of them. They lost to Georgia 34-3. They lost to Louisville 33-21, and they lost to South Carolina in what we thought was a do or die game. Ended up not being one, but we thought it was a do or die game. They lost 17-14. They scored 14 points. So Clemson, good to that, good for them, good for Dabo for getting to this point, but they cannot stack up with what Texas has to offer. Again, like you said, particularly on defense.
100%. Grant, are we ready to move into the big game? This is probably the biggest game of the weekend.
It is. And I just want to say Clemson, Texas, that's the one I'm shakiest about of all my spread bets. I think that's the toughest to call.
I don't want to lay 12 points with Texas, but I do think Texas wins by 12 points at least.
Agreed.
If they come out and play their game, if they play their game and score in a little bit, they should have no problems. Cade Klubnik's probably second best quarterback. We were talking about this. Probably the second best quarterback in the college football playoff, but still, Clemson defensively, they're going to have trouble. I don't think they can stop Texas offensively, and Texas's defense is as good as advertised.
Yep, agreed.
All right, Tennessee, Ohio State. The world is betting Tennessee. Everyone's money is on Tennessee in this spot. I think it's the most bet spread this weekend. I think most bet by bets, handle, all that that I've been seeing on Twitter here. Tennessee, number 19 in the college football playoff, going to play number 8 Ohio State. My one fear in this game for Tennessee, they have a freshman quarterback. They're playing in the cold. But I don't think Ohio State's that connected of a football team right now. Seeing what happened after Michigan, yes, they might come out. They might be really energized. They might be motivated. But we were talking, if Tennessee can go up early in this game, you force Will Howard to have to throw the ball, which I think they're going to have to do in general in this game because Tennessee is very good against the run. I think they're going to have to get it to their playmakers on the perimeter. There is a route for an upset here. I think it's a Tennessee cover and an Ohio State win, though, late. What do you think?
So if I'm drafting teams and take the top 4 out of it, so take Georgia, take Oregon out of it. If I'm drafting teams, I want Ohio State to play right after that Michigan loss. Tennessee might be the last team that I would face. I'm not saying Tennessee is better than Penn State, is better than Notre Dame. They could be. What I'm saying is just stylistically, the way they match up, the strengths of their team. It's not what you want to see if you are Ohio State, again, coming off of that Michigan loss, right? Because what Ohio State did was they played Michigan's game. They have spent the last few years dominating they get really fast receivers. They dominate the air, but then they face Michigan and they get punched in the mouth. They're not physical enough. They can't stop the run. They lose the game. This year, they went into that game saying, all those wrongs we had in years past, we're going to right them. We are going to run at you. We are going to stack the box. We're going to play smash mouth football. And it didn't work. They tried to play a style that wasn't conducive to what they're best at, and they ended up losing. So I think that's good from the perspective that they're going to be able to learn from that. And hopefully they take a different approach into this Tennessee game. Yes, Tennessee has an incredible defense, and maybe you're not overly confident in how Will Howard is going to do. But when you've got Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Ibuka, and you can run to the outside with your Judkins and your Hendersons, you've got to take advantage of your speed. You got to take advantage of your athleticism, your skill, get it on the outside, and let your playmakers make plays in space. So if Ohio State comes out with that mentality, Ohio State, just from a player-to-player, roster-to-roster perspective, probably has the number 1 roster in the country. That, if you just look at from guy 1 to guy 53, quarterback to receiver to linebacker to safety, they've got the best roster. So if they come out with the right approach, the right mindset, Chip Kelly said he puts the loss to Michigan on himself. He said he called a bad game, and I agree. They come out and they do what they're supposed to. They are better than Tennessee. The problem is if they don't come out like that, if they give Tennessee any window at all, Tennessee is really good and they excel in the areas that would cause Ohio State problems.
If you're Oregon, do you want to see Ohio State or Tennessee?
I would rather see Tennessee.
Yeah, I'd rather see a new team.
I want Dan Lanning scheming for a freshman quarterback. I feel comfortable there.
Yeah, and I personally think Oregon's going to beat Ohio State and Tennessee. I think they're a more connected football team, and I think that does matter here. Ryan Day in the big game scares me a little bit. This is a big game. This is a big spot, and I just have my fears if Ohio State doesn't come out fast, because we know Tennessee is going to start fast in this game. If I'm Tennessee, I'm taking shots down the field right away. I'm trying to score first, because if you score first, you put the pressure on Ohio State. If I'm Tennessee, I'm coming out and playing quick. And I don't think Ohio State is going to react very well to that. I think they might press the panic button. And I think as a fan base, like, people are mad that Ryan Day has diminished the Michigan game. Like, Ryan Day basically came out and said, it's just a game, but we're still in the college football playoff. Like, people don't want to hear that. I think this Michigan loss is going to haunt them the rest of the season because more times than not, how many times do teams like take a negative and make it a positive? A lot more times, I think they keep that negative and they take that negative and it just carries into this football game. So I think that's more likely to happen. I think the Michigan loss is going to be in the back of their head there. And I think there's a route to victory for Tennessee. It could go horribly wrong. Ohio State could cover this number and win outright because, as you're saying, they are 100% the better team here. But if Tennessee scores first and Tennessee can put the pressure on, Nico can hit his deep shots down the field. Tennessee wins this game.
I agree with pretty much everything you said, but I do want to defend Ryan Day because what else is he supposed to say in this situation? It's a game. Right. It's a game. We lost. It's unfortunate, but it's going to happen. You would think it was good for Chip Kelly, at least, because I didn't like the game he called, and I don't know if that was him. I don't know if that was under Ryan Day's direction. Whoever it was, the game plan didn't work. And again, Tennessee, very good. That defensive line is outstanding. You're not going to be able to run into the teeth for that defense, which is exactly what you tried to do against Michigan. So that should give you some help, even though you didn't get to the conference championship game and you would have loved it. Well, you got an extra week off. You got more time to recover. You got more time to prepare for this opponent. If you had played in the conference championship, Tennessee didn't, so they would have had an extra week of preparation on you. So this can be a positive for them. And that's what I want to see. Going back to what you said about how Tennessee does come out to start this game, I'm wondering if it's what they did when they went down to Georgia. They ended up losing, obviously, but they were up 7-0 or 10-0, whatever it was. And they came out in that turbo offense. They were taking deep shots down the field. Didn't hit on all of them, but deep shots down the field. Once they got inside the red zone, they ran the ball. They scored pretty easily, and they got a stop on Georgia on their first drive. If Tennessee can get off to that type of start again, then, like you said, that's when it gets a little scary if you're Ohio State.
Yeah, definitely. So looking at the quarterfinals here, if we get Ohio State versus Oregon in the rematch, who would you take in that game?
Well, just to be clear here, I'm taking Ohio State to beat Tennessee, and I'm actually laying the points with them. But I think the two bets on the bottom side of the bracket are my favorite. The top side of the bracket gets a little dicey. Ohio State, Oregon, I think whoever wins that game wins the national championship. That's just where I'm at with this. Respect to Georgia. Not saying that Gunnar Stockton can't be a difference maker, but I would just feel more comfortable with Carson Beck because of the experience and because of a word that you used, actually, connectivity. I like connectivity and I like continuity. And when I look at some of these other teams, particularly Oregon, that's the feeling that I get with them more. And Ohio State, like I mentioned, they've got the best roster in college football. They might not have the number one pick in the draft, and they might not be as strong at one position group as another team, but just overall balance, they are number one. So I think whichever one of those two teams wins that game, I think they move on. And Oregon getting the bye, having already beaten Ohio State, more time to prepare, I think they're in the better spot to move on in that game.
And the good part is, too, that game was on October 12th. Like, the phrase, it's tough to beat a team twice. It is tough to beat a team twice, but that was 2 months ago. Over 2 months ago. These two teams are completely different at this point in the year. Oregon's found themselves a little more. I know they had a tough battle against Wisconsin, but again, that's going to happen in college football. But Oregon, I think, has gotten better since that point. Dillon Gabriel has gotten a lot better since that point, where Ohio State maybe has taken a little bit of the backseat. I need to see what Ohio State looks like against Tennessee, because if Ohio State struggles with Tennessee, I think it's just a much better sign for Oregon. If Ohio State loses Tennessee, obviously that Tennessee's moving on. But if Ohio State doesn't come out and blow out Tennessee, I think there will be a lot of negative noise around that locker room for Ohio State.
I think what's encouraging is that Penn State did score 37 points on that Oregon defense in the Big Ten championship, and they had the ball with 2.5 minutes left, and they threw it away on an interception. So you can score on them. We know that. Ohio State also scored 31 points in Autzen, on the road when they played. They only lost by 1 point. So Ohio State doesn't necessarily feel inferior, right? That's not the mindset they have. Certain teams going into certain matchups, there might be a mental block, or you might just know you're not as good as the other team. It's not like that happened. It's just we lost to them. Now we're trying to get our revenge. We're trying to get our get back.
And the game's in Pasadena. That helps. That helps Oregon rather than Ohio State. I mean, not crazy, but it helps for Oregon to not have to travel too far. Bigger fan base probably coming to that football game. So I think Oregon probably wins it. I think it's tough. I really think Texas can be either one of these teams, though. Again, if you start using Arch Manning in the red zone, because I know I have the SEC bias, but I truly think the strength of schedule, not that Texas played anybody, can help these SEC teams, just like Georgia too, at the bottom half of the bracket. People saying Notre Dame can beat Georgia or Indiana can beat Georgia. Not many people picking Indiana, but the SEC talent, the SEC schedule will help them, just like Tennessee. If Tennessee gets through this Ohio State game and they can somehow beat Oregon, their schedule is a big reason for their success.
I definitely agree with that. And kind of just to expand on what I said, whoever wins between Ohio State and Oregon, they win the national championship. I would also put Tennessee in there. I think if Tennessee beats Ohio State, whoever wins between them and Oregon, in my opinion, becomes my pick to win the national championship.
Yeah, and I think too, it's like if Tennessee does win that football game, I think it's a little different because I think Texas probably matches up better against a Tennessee, like because it's SEC. I think Ohio State, if they got through the Rose Bowl, that one scares me a little bit. I think Ohio State could win that football game. But I agree. I think the winner comes out of the Rose Bowl. You can make this bet on FanDuel right now, like which quarterfinal is going to win the national championship. I think the favorite right now is obviously Ohio State, Oregon, Tennessee.
It's interesting because the SEC bias exists for a reason. It's the best conference in America. But if you look at some of these teams, they're just not, like we were talking on the last show that Indiana is unproven, Notre Dame is unproven, right? Texas is unproven. I'm sorry. Yeah. They have talent. We know that. But looking at their wins this season, the Michigan win, I'm not even counting as a ranked win. They beat Oklahoma when Oklahoma was ranked. Oklahoma is awful. I believe they'd also just switched to their freshman quarterback there. They get stomped by Georgia despite Carson Beck having 3 interceptions. Their best win of the season was 3 points in overtime against Vanderbilt or Texas A&M at the end of the year when they scored, I think, like 10 offensive points. Texas still has a lot to prove. You know, we know about Sark's history and we know about the talent on this roster. And again, I think they have the best defense in the country. So I'm not slandering them. I'm just saying when we talk about SEC bias and brand bias in general, we can't be unrealistic here. The SEC teams deserve more points, yes, but we can't look at this like, well, Texas is in the SEC. So if they play Ohio State, if they play Oregon, you know, the Big Ten is nowhere near the SEC. That's going to be an easy win for Texas. That's just not true.
No, I totally agree with that. The only proven SEC team in this is Georgia, and I would say Tennessee. Tennessee played a pretty tough schedule, but Georgia played one of the toughest schedules in the country. So I think it might have been the toughest schedule in the country.
It was, yeah.
It was the toughest schedule in the country. So Georgia is the only team that's quote unquote, I think, proven. Tennessee is right there as well. Like Tennessee can beat Ohio State. There's no reason that Tennessee can't beat Ohio State. I do think Ohio State's better, but the Volunteers can definitely make a statement in that game. Looking at Texas making their way down the bracket, though, if you know that you have a clear path to the semifinals, and that semifinal is the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic in Texas, you only got to win one game realistically. You got a good chance to go to the national championship game. And that's why they're, you know, you've talked about it, Grant. Texas is one of the favorites right now. I don't necessarily think because they're the best team, because they have not an easy path. They're going to have to win one tough game, but realistically, it should be a cakewalk in the first 2 rounds.
And this brings me back to my proposal to make the college football playoff better. And I love that we're getting the 12 team. I don't want to be ungrateful because it's like we got something positive and all of a sudden we're asking for change. I am thankful we have this. I know a lot of purists argue for the 4 team. The 12 team creates conversation. It creates interest. It creates storylines. That means it's better for the sport. As long as it's not tearing the fabric apart, as long as we're not losing competition or anything like that, then I think that means it's a net positive for the sport. I think that's what we've gotten. But if we're looking at these paths, Oregon should have the easiest path. They were the only undefeated team. They were the number 1 seed. They get a bye. So their reward is Tennessee or Ohio State. As that's not how it should be. Arizona State is the lowest ranked team to get a bye, and I believe they might be the lowest ranked team in the entire field. I would have to go back and look at the CFP rankings, but Arizona State gets Clemson, Texas, and then whoever wins that, you're in the semifinal. So Texas, because they're the 5 seed, could have a better path than Oregon because they're the 1 seed. Texas has to beat Clemson and Arizona State, and they're in the semifinal. Oregon has to beat, again, either Ohio State or Tennessee. And Ohio State, I think we would say, is right there with Texas. They've got to beat Tennessee and Oregon, whereas Texas has to beat Clemson and Arizona State. It's not even at all the way it is right now.
Now, Penn State and Texas have the easiest path to the semifinals. Every team has to win one tough game that is the semifinals, but some teams, like if you're Tennessee, Ohio State, even Oregon got punished for winning the Big Ten. Oregon should have been playing SMU in the first round, I believe, but it's like Oregon should have had Boise State's path based on how good they were. They're undefeated. Now you got to play Ohio State in a rematch. And again, that's going to make for good television, but it's not fair to them. All right, Grant. So let's look at the quarterfinals here. And I want to throw the Oregon, Tennessee, Ohio State game out because that's a game that anyone can win. I wouldn't call any side there an upset. If we get Texas, Arizona State, Penn State, Boise State, Notre Dame, Georgia, which game is most likely to be an upset?
So you said Texas to Arizona State, Penn State, Boise State, Notre Dame, Georgia, right?
Yes.
Well, so I've got Indiana winning that game, so I'm going to say
do?
Indiana, Georgia.
Okay.
The way I said it on our last show was, if I'm Georgia, I think that Indiana is easier to beat than Notre Dame, but I also think they're easier to lose to than Notre Dame is. I don't see Notre Dame scoring enough points to beat Georgia, but I also think they just make it tougher on Georgia. I think they lean into that. I think Indiana creates more variance. There's a wider array of outcomes. And when you're the better team, your job is to eliminate variance. You want to play a straight up game because you know you're better, and that's how you win. Indiana is the variance in that situation. So I think that gets dicey, but I would still take Georgia to win there. Boise State would be an underdog if they played Penn State. I'm not sure what it would be if they played SMU. They might still be an underdog there. Honestly, I think there's a chance there's an upset in that one. I would say it's unlikely just because the way that Boise State plays, obviously they want to run the ball. They want to make it a physical game. Trying to play a physical game against Penn State is not the smart strategy because Penn State is more physical than you. But in this case, you've got Ashton Genty, who, in my opinion, deserved to win the Heisman, ended up finishing second. It's just you have that one guy who could take the game over, and there would be a lot of pressure on him to do that. But Penn State has not shown up in some respects in big games. They gave up 45 points to Oregon in the Big Ten championship. They only scored, I think it was 13 or 14 at home against Ohio State when they played them earlier in the year. So if you can get Penn State on one of their off days, then I think the Boise State game might be your best shot in an upset.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Georgia, Indiana, I don't see on an upset alert. I see Georgia, Notre Dame more on upset alert, but again, I can't take either of those teams serious until they get in that game. You know, we've seen it. We see when the SEC faces the other conferences, and more times than not, if you play the SEC every single time, you're going to win. So I can't necessarily see the upset down there. I could see Boise State maybe giving Penn State a run for their money, just because I have my questions about James Franklin in the big game. Did you see what he said talking about like the student section? It sounded like he was ready to get his ass kicked already.
Well, yeah, so I saw the clip, or I saw the description, but I didn't watch the clip. What was he saying?
He basically was like, I have my fears that Beaver Stadium isn't going to feel like a great atmosphere because the students aren't here and it's after finals. And also, this doesn't feel like a home playoff game because our next game is on the road no matter what. Like, we're at a neutral site. Like, it just wasn't a winning meant. It wasn't like, yeah, I can't wait. Like, this place is going to be rocking. It's our first home playoff game. Then we get to go on the road. Like, it was just a very like loserish mentality. It was scary.
And you know what? That mentality has manifested itself in some of these performances over the year for Penn State. So I'm not surprised that he would say something like that. And honestly, James Franklin, who gives a shit if it doesn't feel like there's not the most palpable tension. It isn't the best environment in the world. You're Penn State. You're at home. You might not have the fans behind you, but you don't have to travel. You get to stay in your facility. You're playing a team from Texas who has no business competing with you talent-wise. They are practicing outdoors in 80 degrees where it's sunny. You are getting ready for the elements. They're coming to your building. Who cares if you're not at 100% capacity? If you're at 85 or 90%, you should not be losing this game.
No. Let me see. Penn State. So they had 42,000 undergraduate students in University Park. You're still Penn State. All right. This Penn State football is one of the best traditions in college football. You are going to get a full stadium here. I would be shocked if you didn't get a full stadium. And I would be shocked if kids didn't stay on campus to watch this football game. Now, I know probably the dorms may shut down. Who knows? I don't know. But you know for damn sure there's kids staying for this game. You're going to have 100,000 people there. That's just what it is. I don't think it would be surprising to not see the place filled up for a home playoff game for Penn State when they have a legitimate chance of reaching the national semifinals. That's a bad comment by James Franklin. And SMU, they're not going to knock off Penn State. They have no chance of knocking off Penn State. It's going to be too cold for them. They're too undisciplined. They're not there yet. I think they could be in the coming years. They're not ready to play Penn State. But this is the reason why Penn State is not going to win the national championship.
We have no mention of Arizona State there, which I don't think Arizona State would beat Texas. But just to give them some credit, Kenny Dillingham's done a great job with this program. They're not supposed to be in the playoff. They've already defied the odds. Cam Scadaboo had a great year. Their quarterback's a freshman. He looks really promising. So maybe Arizona State is a team to watch. Maybe they're going to start to rise in the Big 12 power. But I do not think they have the talent to run against this Texas defense. That's what you're going to have to do. You know, Cam Scadaboo is your best player. You're going to have to run at him. And I think that's just a losing recipe.
Yeah. All right. So you're picking Oregon. You're picking Texas. You're picking Georgia. And you're picking Penn State.
Right? To win in the second round?
Yeah, second round.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because upsets are going to happen. It's just the way it is. But the way the bracket shakes out, I just don't really see that many that are that possible.
No, and again, I mean, you could call Ohio State over Oregon an upset. You could call Tennessee over Oregon an upset. Like, I don't feel it's upset worthy. Like, upset is Boise State knocking off Penn State. Notre Dame probably knocking off Georgia's an upset, but that's a pretty common pick out of a lot of people right now because of the quarterback situation. And then Arizona Tech, like if Arizona State knocked off Texas, that would be a massive upset. I just don't see it happening. So we get Texas, Oregon. We get Georgia versus Penn State. I want you to predict if these games will be close or not. Texas
Georgia
versus
Penn
Oregon.
State would definitely be close, and not that that's saying Penn State has a chance to win that game. It's saying that the type of game that it calls for is a close game. You know, that one of the things we commend Tom Brady for, the reason he was so good and he always won these games was it was after one series, maybe one quarter, Tom Brady knew what type of game he needed to play. Do I need to throw for 400 yards? Do I need to hand the ball off 40 times? Do we need to score first to 10 wins? Is this a defensive game? Do we need a turnover? He always knew that type of game. The same thing kind of applies to great head coaches. They are able to set the game in the way they want it to be played. They set the stage, you play into it. If you're going against Penn State here, there's no reason to trade shots with them, especially with Carson Beck out of the lineup. Penn State has been explosive. They're actually like really high in yards per play and all that stuff. But just as an offense, when you break them down, when you look at the talent, the players they have in the positions they do, and what would be the best possible game for them, they don't want to do that. They want to be physical. They want to run the ball, throw it on third down when they need to. But that plays into the game that Georgia wants to play. So I see this as like a 20-17, 17-14 type game that might look close on the scoreboard, but I think Georgia controls the game and they move on to the championship there.
I agree. So how do you see the Texas versus Oregon game script playing out?
That one for me, Oregon has the most speed of any team in the country. And I think that's interesting because Texas has an extremely rangy athletic defense. They've got the Jim Thorpe Award winner in the secondary. They can do a lot of things. I just worry that execution wise, I think Dan Lanning to me is second in Kirby Smart as far as having his team most prepared to win games. And if we're looking at only this season, Oregon has not played the same schedule that Texas or Georgia has, obviously. But if we just look at the big moments of the biggest games, you can say that Dan Lanning has been the most prepared coach in the country. So I just think late in the game there, that combined with needing an injured Quinn Ewers to make plays, knowing Quinn Ewers can't really drive the ball into tight windows, doesn't have mobility. I think that's also maybe like a 6 or a 7 point game, but I think Oregon kind of pulls away in the end.
What happens if Arch Manning comes out, plays?
We're just gonna have to see how he plays, right? Like, we know about the potential he has, but at the end of the day, this would still be very early in his career as a starter, and is a tough stage to get thrown into.
Yeah, definitely. I see Oregon winning that football game. I think people are down on Texas, Grant. I don't think people are taking Texas as seriously as they should be right now. Would you agree with that?
Well, I don't know. I want
don't know.
to see betting splits for futures odds. I want to know how many people are betting Texas.
Because the path is easy. Like Penn State, the path is easy, and then you have to win one game. And any one of these teams can win one football game.
Yeah.
So.
I'm looking at some hypothetical odds going back to the quarterfinal. They have FanDuel has Texas as 13.5 point favorites against Arizona State. So they don't think that would be any trouble. They've got Oregon. This kind of goes back to what we said. This is interesting, actually, now that I look at this. So Ohio State is a 7.5 point favorite over Tennessee, as we know. But if we look at hypothetical odds of Oregon versus Ohio State, Oregon versus Tennessee, Oregon's 1.5 point favorite against Ohio State, 4.5 against Tennessee. So despite them saying Ohio State is 7.5 points better than Tennessee, they only think when they match up with Oregon, they're 3 points apart. I find that interesting.
Neutral site too. That's making a big difference.
Well, I mean, if we take the 2.5 points away, we're still like 5-6 points. So they're saying it's closer with Oregon than it is in this matchup we're getting.
Well, the thing is, stylistically, Tennessee and Oregon are very similar. They're both going to play fast. They're both going to create explosive plays. Where Ohio State and Oregon have very contrasting styles of how they play football.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And actually, if we do get Notre Dame, Georgia, the upset would be Georgia winning because they're 1.5 point underdogs.
And that's a quarterback situation right there.
Yeah, it is. And Georgia 6.5 point favorites against Indiana.
Yeah, and again, if the quarterback was in play, Georgia's 3.5 against Notre Dame, I bet. And
so,
we'll see what Gunnar Stockton looks like too. If Georgia comes out, Gunnar Stockton plays well against Notre Dame, and they win, they will be favored over anybody in the semifinals.
So I know you have Georgia in the national championship. That semifinal there, Oregon, Texas. You're taking Oregon as well.
I would take Oregon there, and I do have Georgia in the national championship with the caveat that I think Notre Dame could beat them. I really do, but I don't see anybody but Georgia winning the national championship on that side of the bracket.
So before we get to our national championship picks, question for you. We know how March Madness works. There's always a Cinderella team, a team that wins in the first round they're not supposed to, and they get hot. Is that going to happen? Is football like basketball? Is the fact that we have 7 to 10 days between games, is that different from playing the next day?
Football is not like basketball because anyone can win. You can put me on the floor in a Division I college basketball game right now, and if I get hot from the 3-point line, I can go out and change a game. And not saying maybe not me, but you know what I mean. Yeah. I cannot go. Anyone can make a shot in basketball. That's why we see upsets. If you take the most talented football team in the world versus the worst football team in the college football playoff, the margins are probably pretty big still. I mean, they're obviously smaller now rather than playing an FCS school versus an FBS school. But if you take Texas's talent versus Arizona State's talent, there is no reason Arizona State should be able to play with Texas. If you play that game 10 times, it should not be close 9 of the times. And I'm going to leave one time in there because upsets do happen.
So you don't see a team winning in the first round, and because they won that one game, they now have a run to the semifinal.
If SMU wins in the first round, they could beat Boise State. If Notre Dame wins in the first round, they could beat Georgia. I mean, Georgia's coming in not playing. Georgia's coming in with a backup quarterback in a situation where we haven't seen what he can do besides the second half of the Texas game. So, there are a lot of situations where a team can win. Ohio State can win and then beat Oregon, but those teams aren't surprises. Like if SMU beats Penn State, that's a massive upset, but they play Boise State. They probably beat Boise State. So looking at the teams that I would say quote unquote surprises to make it to like a semifinal, Arizona State would be a surprise. I can't really say Boise State would be a surprise because they have to win one game to get to a semifinal. Clemson would be a surprise, but if they beat Texas, then they're favored against Arizona State in my mind. So the way the bracket's set up, the big dogs should find a way to win it, but also there's some smaller dogs like Boise State, SMU that do have a path to the semifinals by winning one game.
So we both have Oregon, Georgia in the national championship. Who do you have there?
Oregon.
I also have Oregon.
Most connected team in the country. You kind of get the vibes too. And this might be it. Might just be me. I remember like week 6, week 7, College Game Day ran a special on Dan Lanning's wife. She had cancer. I don't know if you saw this thing. She, he was a gym teacher, whatever. He went to coach college football. He didn't make any money for 10 years, right? Wife stuck by him. He finally gets his first job, not head coaching job, but first position job when he's starting to make a little money at Memphis. His wife gets cancer, bad cancer. They have kids. It looked like the wife's going to die. She ends up pulling through, and now she's in remission. Dan Lanning goes on to head coaching job. Now he's at Oregon, right? Got the young family, got the connection with the kids. Like you just feel that kind of stuff. Like there's moments where these stories come into play. Like I know Dan Lanning, those kids like love Dan Lanning and will do anything for him. You see that how they play. I can't say the same thing about Ryan Day right now. I can't say the same thing about Steve Sarkisian at Texas. I can't say the same. I can say that for Kirby. I can say that for Georgia for sure. But I know when I look at like how like the seasons go and how teams play and like these Cinderella stories that do happen a lot, like Oregon winning a national championship, they're the most connected team in the country. I think that College Game Day special is in the back of my head, but like that's also another reason to say Dan Lanning's been through some shit off the field. And that's another reason why, like these moments, he's going to take advantage of them from a football perspective.
When I think about what it takes to beat Kirby Smart, I'm not saying Kirby as Kirby. I'm saying Kirby as this type of coach where it's like they are the one in power. It was Nick Saban. It was Andy Reid. It was Bill Belichick. You know what the coach is going to do. The coach is so great. And Kirby, Kirby's smart as well. But a guy like Belichick, it was mostly all his intelligence. Players didn't love the Belichick personality. Kirby, it is some of that personality. The point I'm making here is when you're going up against a coach like that, who has the undivided attention of his players, and his players will do anything that they say, you have to kind of what you're getting at. You have to be connected as a team. And we didn't talk about this, but I love the word connectivity in all sports because you need to move as one unit. And when I look at what Oregon has done this year, that's what they've been able to do. If you go back to the start of the season, they played, I think it was Idaho and whoever it was, and they almost lost. They beat Boise State by 3 points. Oregon, every week of the season until that Wisconsin game, got better. And they changed the offense up. They moved some players around. And they just continued to believe in each other, and it got better every single week throughout the season. Georgia, I think, is used to having a talent advantage on defense, their defense versus your offense. They're used to, if not being more talented there, at least being equals. I think they would be equals with Oregon, but Oregon's speed is something that nobody in the SEC has. I think that could be tough to adjust to for Georgia. And we think about Georgia as being this great defense. They haven't been outstanding this year. They've come up big in a couple of games against Texas, but in other spots, they've kind of let them down. And if Oregon is able to get off to a hot start like Alabama did, if Oregon goes up 10-0, 14-0, I think that becomes pretty difficult for Georgia there. And I don't think Georgia has the offense that they need to respond. Is Gunnar Stockton going to be able to conjure up continual 20, 30, 40-yard pass plays with his team trailing in the game? With him having that lack of experience and Georgia's receivers being as bad as they are, I just don't think that's possible. So I think Dan Lanning, again, because the buy-in he has from his team and also just how smart he is. I understand that he is early in his coaching career. Right now, I'm willing to put Dan Lanning as the second best college football coach in America, right behind Kirby. and I think he has the team to take down Georgia.
Georgia needs to start faster than they've started. Like they can't afford to play from behind like they seem to do every single week. But you never know. Like Gunnar Stockton, this kid could be a household name by the end of the college football playoff. He might go down as somebody who wasn't right for the moment, but he could also be the hottest player coming to college football next season if he can lead Georgia to the national championship. I think this doesn't become like Georgia. This doesn't become Kirby versus Dan Lanning because I think all things even, Kirby's going to win the football game. Oregon's the best team in the country. They've been the best team in the country all season. They've gotten better. And since they barely beat Ohio State at home, they've gotten better since that moment. They have the bye week. You look at Tennessee coming in. I still think Tennessee with the freshman quarterback is going to struggle. Ohio State not as connected. And Oregon, in the end of the day, the quarterback wins the game. And Dylan Gabriel is the one quarterback in this thing that we said can go win a game for you. Dylan Gabriel is the only one that can do that right now. Riley Leonard cannot do that. Ashton Ginty cannot go win a football game for you. He might help, but against Penn State, we're going to see if he can run the football. Arizona State, no. Quinn Ewers, no. One quarterback can do it. So I think that's the reason Oregon is the move there.
I'm with you. Oregon national champions. And it's also, I don't want it to sound like we're picking the undefeated team because they're undefeated. That's not why. I regularly bet against the number one team, quote unquote, that there is. It's just the coach, the way this team has been playing, the bye, it sets up well for them.
And the one tough spot that they have, like for Oregon, the quarterfinals the toughest game. If Oregon gets through the quarters, they should win the semis. Like Texas will be a underdog in that football game. Now, bookmakers view Texas in this light, like the horns are back and Matthew McConaughey, and like people view Texas better than I think Texas is, but they do that for a reason. Their defense is really good, so they are an underrated team in here, and I think Texas there's a route for Texas to beat Oregon because it's probably going to be the best defense Oregon's seen all season. So there's paths there for these other teams, but Oregon overall best team. They found ways to win week after week. Dan Lanning's connected this team. They got the bye. They're going to be feeling good, and they have the best quarterback. So it makes sense to take Oregon. Georgia, there's an easier path for Georgia to not be in the finals than to be in the finals. They got to win two tough games. You're going to have to beat a Penn State team and a Notre Dame team with a good quarterback, or Indiana, or with a backup quarterback. But Oregon, if they get through the Ohio State game, they should be in the national championship.
And also that win definitely, if they do beat Ohio State, it confirms what they think about themselves. Georgia with the backup quarterback, for example, it's still week to week. We don't know what the kid's going to give us. Can we win this game? Oregon, they start the bracket with a 10-point win against Ohio State. It's like, we know we're national champion worthy. We just got to go do it.
And they also know too, again, Ohio State might be looking ahead to Oregon, but if you were Oregon right now, we're getting Tennessee or Ohio State. We got a ball game in the first round, and they've been prepping for that ball game for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So
why don't you tell the people about your big bet you got going on, and then we can get out of here.
So, and you guys can, if anyone's listening to this point in the show, hopefully they are, but I took a conference champion to win the national championship. I had a future on Georgia in general, but I want to get a little more fun. So a conference champion to win the college football playoff, that's plus 130. A non-conference champion to win the college football playoff was minus 152. So I took the conference champion because that's banking on Oregon or Georgia. As a little bit of a hedge, I also took Texas to win the college football playoff. The reason I did that, they should have a clear path to the semifinals. If they play Oregon, Texas, I set up perfectly there. If it's Ohio State, Texas, I still set up okay because now Texas can win and I'm not totally eliminated. On the bottom half of the bracket, I really need Georgia to win down there. If Boise State could steal a game, that would help me a lot, but I need Georgia at the bottom part of the bracket. However, my thinking there for taking Texas at the top part is the fact that if Georgia does not make it to the national championship, I don't see a world where Notre Dame or Penn State beats anybody, including Texas, at the top part of the bracket. So that was my reason for hedging a little bit with Texas.
I think what did you get Texas for? +5, +6?
+5.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a smart way to go about it. The only thing I would worry about there would be Ohio State. They are definitely the troublemaker there, but I think you've got it set up the right way.
Yeah, I mean, I basically took plus 130, and by adding Texas into it, you kind of take it to a favorite bet, because now you have
Mhm.
Texas there. And two, okay, well, Ohio State gets there. At least I still have Georgia in the bottom half if Georgia can do what they're supposed to do. And then Georgia, Ohio State, I still match up okay in that game. So there's a lot of, I think it's very unlikely that I'm not in the national championship game with at least one winning option. And there's a good chance I'm in there with two winning options.
Yeah, it's crazy because this is the worst Georgia team probably of the last 3-4 years, and they've got a
They're still the
backup
best.
quarterback, and it's like their side of the bracket again. They've avoided Texas, Tennessee, Ohio State, and Oregon. It just fell right into place for them.
The last time Notre Dame played in the national championship against an SEC team in the year of Manti Te'o, what happened?
That was the that was the last time they were in the
In a
national
national
championship.
champion. Yeah, 2013, I think.
Yeah, because that was the final year before the playoff, right?
Yes. And what happened in that football game?
Did not go well.
Did not go well. Riley, who would you rather have? Riley Leonard or Gunnar Stockton? I'll tell you what, Riley Leonard could not have come in against Texas in the second half of the SEC championship and did what Gunnar Stockton did.
Gunnar Stockton showed moxie. He showed grit, and I loved that about him.
It's not like this kid's a true freshman. He's a redshirt sophomore. He's been on campus for 3 years. He's 20-something years, or 21 years old probably. He's played in games, and he's played in a big game in the SEC championship. And you know what? He got concussed like crazy. That was one of the hardest hits. His eyeballs were rolling the back of his head. And you know what he did, Grant?
He
You know what he did?
popped up.
No, he held on to the football. Like he held on to the ball. You popped up, but he held on to the ball. That's the biggest thing there. He protects the football. He cares for the football. He loves the football. So Georgia's fine. I'm not worried about Georgia.
Did you ever know anybody who slept with a football or slept with their
No,
cleats or anything like that when you were playing?
Crazy. That's stupid. No, nobody did that.
Some people have premonitions like that. I had a friend who used to sleep with his track spikes in the same bed as him.
That's weird. That's really weird. That does not make any difference on how you run the next day. But this
I
kid,
had the biggest thing for track runners was we used to have race socks. Like it was, you just get some colorful socks, and those were your lucky socks.
yeah, definitely. All right, Grant. Well, that was the college football playoff show. I'm excited. We're going to be breaking this down week after week. This is probably all we're going to talk about, honestly, for the next 2 weeks. So get ready for it on the show. Grant, why don't you take us out of here?
Guys, it is a big day. It's the start of the college football playoffs. So please, 52-minute show. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you have not already. Also, make sure you check out WSN.com for anything and everything related to sports betting. Tanner and I will catch you all in the next episode of Ride the Line.